I'm going to tell Christa's birth story. So Christa was my daughter who was born very healthy, and she ended up being shaken by her biological father at 3.5 months old. So when I planned to have Christa, I wanted it to be, with no medical intervention at all, as possible. I would have accepted that if it was life-threatening, but I knew that I wanted to go into it and experience a completely different experience than I experienced with my first child, which was induced, epidural, hospital, all of these things. So I was, I think, 22 years old or 23 when I had Christa, and I chose to have her at a birthing center. At the time was named Baby and Company. They have them some places in the U.S. and you cannot get epidural. You can't get things like that there. It's they had midwives and nurses there, so no one to administer those kind of things. And it was near a hospital, so if there was an emergency, you could be, taken over there by ambulance. But this was a place that is supposed to be very serene and a good environment to do a natural birth. And I would agree that it was. It was a very good environment. And so on the day that I went to have Christa, they don't want you to come until, you're in active labor and getting closer to the time to push. Whereas at a hospital, usually you go in, and if you're a certain amount dilated, they'll keep you, and then you might still be there for hours and hours and hours before you even have the baby and things like that. So this is kind of different in that way. And just a little backstory on Christa. I had Christa in a, very abusive, toxic marriage. And so at the time, I was trying to work things out with Christa's biological father, and so he was present during all of this. And then, of course, later on, after he shook her and things like that, he was clearly not going to be part of her life anymore. But during this time, he was. So he's in part of this story. So I had my support people were my mom, and was supposed to be him, and I had a cousin with me, and the midwife. So, and then I also hired a doula. So around the time that I started contractions was the night before. I would say I really started to feel them around 8 p.m. During the night, I woke up feeling them, and they just kind of progressed on. And you can really tell you're in labor. You think, oh no, what if I don't know? What if I wait too soon? But you're going to be able to tell. You can tell when you are in labor. I don't know how to explain it, but you just know. So at home around 8 a.m. that morning, my mucus plug came out at home, and that's when contractions really started to get stronger. So I called my mom to come get me. The reason I had her come get me is because my ex-husband was supposed to be taking our older daughter to, the babysitters. So I get to the hospital, and everything's progressing very well. And I did not know what to expect. I'm like 23, 22 years old. I was very naive about the situation because I had never done it before. And I didn't do too much research. I just knew that's what I wanted. And so I labored a lot in the tub. I really wanted to have the baby in the tub. It didn't happen, but I did labor a lot in the tub. And I can say that gives so much relief, being in the water when you're having contractions like that. Like, I would totally do that again. Would recommend it 100% if you can have water during your labor. And so time was going by. It had been about like 2 or 3 hours, and my ex-husband had not shown up. He was supposed to come straight to the hospital, and he was just nowhere to be found. I couldn't get a hold of him in any way, and I was trying so hard to focus on myself and my baby and not focus on that. I was very disappointed, but I was like, no, I'm having this baby, and I'm not going to worry about him right now. It's the last thing I needed to worry about. So he didn't show up until about like right before she started, I started pushing. So labor progressed, and it was a lot of pain for me. And I found out later that she came out with her hand on her head. And so that made it a lot more painful than it would have if she came out without her hand there. So after about, I guess, probably about an hour of pushing, she did, make her way earthside here. And what happened was I tried to do it on my side, laying down in the bed that they had there, and I just could not make it back to the tub where I wanted to give birth. But pain was just so intense for me that I was like, I cannot go back over there. I can't move. So I tried to have her on my side, and it was not working. Her heart rate was decreasing, and they're like, we're going to have to cut an episiotomy. You know, like, you have to get her out. So they convinced me to get on my knees, and not long after I got on my knees, she came, you know, right out and was born healthy, born perfectly fine. The father was not in the room. He had come, but then I told him, you know, that he could leave because he was just not able to handle the situation. And so my mother was in there with me, and it was just a very beautiful time. And I, you know, look back now and I think I am so thankful that I did it that way, because even during the labor, I was going to name her Bailey. Bailey and Briley were my two daughters. I was going to name her Bailey. But there was something in those moments of just being in such surrender to God and surrender to my body and surrender to what was going on, that it came over me to name her Christa. And then I had no clue what was to come with her being shaken and a brain injury and all these things. And later to find out that the name Christa means anointed one, all of these things, that God gave me that name in those moments where, you know, you're surrendering to this pain and you're in this world that is just completely different, because there is no distraction except what is happening right here. There's no distraction. And so in those moments, you can really get into prayer like you've never gotten into before. And it really allowed me to hear God's voice to say to name her Christa instead of Bailey. And so that's how she got her name. But yeah, that was my birth experience with her. It was actually a very good experience. And we got to go home like 6 hours later, and it was just a beautiful time. And, but yeah, she was born very healthy. And it was then 3.5 months later that she ended up being shaken, and, you know, everything went from there. But that is her birth story.